So just before we start this review, guys, Callum and I are really trying to hit 300 subscribers before 2022. We're really close, and hopefully you guys could make that dream come true for us. That'd be awesome. We'd really appreciate that. With this review as well, we've been so hyped for this movie. Honestly, the hype you've probably seen it on the channel. We make loads of videos about it, trailer breakdowns, all that stuff. So, in this review, we break it down into non-spoilers, spoilers, and then just a little bit about any additional thoughts. End credit scenes, all that stuff. So, time codes will be below, and be sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on the movie down below. It's finally here. I can't believe it. Yeah, Matthew, take it away with your review. Ladies and gents, it's the film we've all been waiting for. This is Callum and I's most anticipated film, I think, in a while, certainly since Avengers Endgame. Everyone's talking about it right now. It's Spider-Man No Way Home. It's a film that we've made loads of videos about. We've done loads of trailer breakdowns about this. We theorize it on basically every video we do, even if it's not a Marvel video necessarily. We were just so hyped for this, and on the 15th of December, I believe, yes, we got the chance to see it. Really cool, really great experience. So we'll get into that because it differed slightly from our usual cinema experience here in Belfast. But yeah, I'll pass over to you, Calm, just to give your thoughts on the hype for the film and the gist of what we're going to be talking about today. Because I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, it was massive hype. We're massive fans of Spider-Man in general. I think we were both, really raised on the character. Big fans of the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series, the Spider-Man animated series from 1994 to 1998. I think it being a huge part of our childhoods, especially I would say Spider-Man 1 for me, Spider-Man 2 for you. The unification of all the villains, reuniting for this film, I think was massive for us. The second trailer, I believe it was. Oh no, yeah, the second trailer, featured Doc Ock heavily, but also then had the actual shot of Green Goblin coming in, whereas in the first trailer, we just had the pumpkin bomb. I think no trailer has gotten me more excited than that second trailer. Uh, and if we want to talk, briefly about the plot of this film, it's that Mysterio has revealed Spider-Man's identity at the end of Far From Home, and in this, Peter just wants people to forget that he himself is Spider-Man, so he enlists the help of Doctor Strange. But in doing so, they crack open the multiverse and they get some visitors from the generations of Spider-Man, seen before. Uh, and I think if we could just give like a pithy one line opinion of the film before we really get into the nitty gritty of it, the non spoilers and the spoilers. What did you think of this film?
Well, my word would just be wow for a start. I don't think the trailers did this movie justice in any way. The trailers were a certain level of hype, and then the film was just something else entirely. It was incredible. I had a brilliant time with this, and probably my favorite cinema experience with you, I think, as well. That's something that we don't usually talk about in movies, because usually it's just us two and seeing a movie that not many people go to see. But this time, of course, packed theater, opening night in Belfast here, and a really good showing. Yeah, we saw it in like I think it was called 3DX or something. IMAX 3D, pretty much. In the new Cineworld that opened. We've got another story to tell you about that in our West Side Story review probably as well, because that was our first time there. But yeah, an amazing experience, mate. I love the film too. What about you?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. Our cinema experiences are either, it's either we have a completely indifferent experience, where it's just fine. We enjoy the film, but nothing good or bad happens while we're there, or it's horrendous. Either with some complication with the technology or the people that are surrounding us. But here it was just amazing. Aside from one thing, which we will go on to talk about in the spoiler section, I have some comments to make about cinema etiquette there. But aside from that,
Yes.
I think seeing it in 3D, it was a real concern for me because I'm sort of prone to headaches and I get a bit queasy. And I couldn't even tell you what the last 3D film I saw was. And then
No,
when we
I couldn't
saw
either.
West Side Story in IMAX, I sort of struggled to focus on what was happening on the screen because it's so wide. I got like the middle fifth and the two outer fifths, but then there was some of it that was just completely lost on me. And obviously I didn't want this experience to be, sullied by the fact that I couldn't, take in everything that was happening on the screen. And then I thought that 3D was just going to add an extra layer of complexity to that, where things are now coming out at you and you have to pay attention to everything that's coming out at you and also the width of the screen. But somehow that sort of brought everything into the middle, and then you were able to be fully immersed. And like I was really surprised, and I can't wait to do it again.
I absolutely agree. I think the first 15, 20 minutes, I was a little bit unsure, I was a little bit skeptical. Not that the movie looked bad in 3D necessarily. It's just whenever, when I was a kid is the last time I saw a movie like that. So it is a bit of an adjustment for your eyes, especially, when an IMAX screen with the curved nature of the cinema. So yeah, it was unusual for the first quarter of the movie, but I have to say after that, I really got used to it, and it was absolutely fantastic. A really great experience there, I have to say. Um, the film itself
And
now.
also,
Oh yes, well,
if you're
I'll
going to
let
the
you.
Belfast, if you're
I'll let
going
you.
to the Belfast Cineworld, middle of row H, best seats in the house.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic. They really are. You did great work getting the seats there 100%. And I think with this kind of film, it makes sense to go see that. Like, this is a spectacle film. It's got that Doctor Strange element to it as well. We've seen that in the trailers. And on the subject of the trailers, like I said, I really don't think any trailer could have done this movie justice for me in terms of, I just think overall fan service, and just general plot and where the direction the movie goes. It's something akin to like an Avengers event film. Like, this is very much, one of Marvel's event films. I do think that'll be reflected in the box office. I think this film will do, way over $1.5 billion, I think.
Ooh, interesting show. I mean, yeah, everybody loves Spider-Man. I think more people love Spider-Man than love the Avengers, which is surprising, honestly, that I know that Spider-Man Homecoming did very well, and then Spider-Man Far From Home did even better. Like, I think Spider-Man Far From Home, I think, do $2 billion. Am I making that up? I think it did. I think it did $2 billion. So I mean that if this doesn't do insane numbers, I will be surprised. But I suppose you have the pandemic element to consider. But I wonder if 10 years from now they're going to look on the period of the pandemic, like how they look on films of the past where they have to adjust for inflation. I wonder if they're going to have to, adjust for the percentage of people that actively chose not to go to the cinema but would have if the pandemic wasn't on. I'm curious if that's how they're going to adjust it in the future to sort of, put the box office into perspective again.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, given that I'm not too sure whether like this kind of film um would have been conceived in that short time. Like, I was thinking about this last night, making notes on this. Spider-Man Homecoming, of course, a 2017 release. It's crazy to me that we've got like a fully fleshed out trilogy here within 4 years. That
Hmm.
seems crazy to me. Granted, it's maybe 5 years, given that this is at the end of 2021, but still, if we take that 3 movies in 4 years, like that's borderline unheard of, man. Especially for films of the magnitude that these are. This is, especially this third one. This is an event film, so I think they've done very well production wise to get those out, and that's not even including other productions that Tom Holland Spider Man is in, with the Avengers and whatnot, and Captain America Civil War. So it's incredible that the amount of work that must go into these kind of massive blockbusters, and with that too, I'd be interested to see if a studio like Disney looks back at this time in the pandemic and thinks, oh, should we have held off on doing an event film until after the pandemic's cleared? Because there was worry. I was a little bit worried that with this new variant and stuff, the movie might have got pushed back to 2022. It's a fear I think we both shared when they were a bit sort of cryptic with releasing the date and stuff in the trailers. We weren't
Hmm.
too sure if it was going to get delayed. So I'm glad it did release when intended, though.
Yeah, and there have been reports that they were sort of working on the VFX up until I mean the reports have said days before the release. I don't know how accurate that is. It's obviously based on insider knowledge, but it could be
Mm.
absolute waffle. Like, it's kind of hard to say. Uh, but I mean, there is one piece of CGI in the film that I really question, and then I think the rest of it is pretty stellar. So I sort of struggle to believe that.
Yeah, I think we're both in agreement of what that CGI is, for sure. I
I
think
don't
we're
know that
both.
we are, Matthew.
Well,
We shall
well,
see
that'll be
though.
interesting. I think mine will be the same as yours. But back onto the film itself. You mentioned there about reports and these things. This film was obviously famously riddled with leaks and things like that. And we've definitely
Which we will
commented.
not go into
Well,
as to
not
whether they are accurate or not.
no, well, 100% not. But one thing we did do is we did sort of discuss them at the time before the release of, our thoughts on them if true and things like that. And I don't think this film was really impacted either way by them. Don't get me wrong. I think, with the villains, of course, we can talk about there and they were marketed. I think that would have been a really nice surprise. But I think for me, my enjoyment of this film was still the same. I think it would have been a really awesome, wow moment to see Doc Ock for the first time in the film. But nevertheless, I was really happy with how they did it. I think uh, you know narratively speaking and plot wise, and how the film plays out tonally and time wise, it works pretty well. It's paced pretty
Yeah, I
nicely.
mean, I suppose if you don't show the villains, what do you show? Is
Mhm.
it just a film about Peter trying to get into university?
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah, that's true.
I guess that's it. You showed the first, you show a few minutes of the first like 20 or something.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe that's how you avoid any form of spoilers. But then I suppose the reason that uh there was a slew of leaks, and once again we're not going to go into which ones, if any, were accurate. Uh, but people were hungry for those spoilers because Sony wasn't giving us any marketing material. So I think people actively sought out these alleged spoilers, because of the drought of information. So I think if they tried to keep everything, held back, if they didn't release a trailer, uh, people would have been even more insufferable with like tweeting them and asking for stuff, and just trying to catch Tom Holland out in interviews and everything. Like I'm sure it would have just been how it has been, but tenfold.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting as well that the release, the length of time between trailer release and the film release is not long at all. Um, I think the first, I think we did a podcast on the first trailer release, and I think that was only a matter of 4 months ago, if that, even
Hmm.
maybe 3 months. I'm not too sure, but yeah, not long at all. Um, I think with the hype of the trailers and the speculation, of course, I think there will be people, might be some people disappointed by this. I for one certainly wasn't. And I really appreciated the fact that this film, with all these characters that they're bringing back from these beloved and some not so beloved films, they still remember what's at heart. That classic trio of Peter, Ned, and MJ. Like with a film like this, you think, oh, they're not going to give Jacob Batalon and Zendaya a lot to do, but for me, I think they got a lot to do. I'd argue they have a lot more here to do than in Spider-Man: Far From Home for me personally, which is great to see.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as Tom Holland has said, they're making this generational film between, the three generations of the villains. And, I did think that, with the marketed villains, being such a presence in the film, I assumed that, the original cast of this Homecoming trilogy was going to be a bit overshadowed, at least in regards to screen time.
Mm,
But, yeah, as you've said, that's not a concern whatsoever.
yeah, that's fantastic.
So we've sort of naturally segued into the non-spoiler section of the discussion. But if you have any actual non-spoiler thoughts, because mine I think are pretty much limited to spoilers at this point.
Yeah, I can just say a few things. I thought, like we said, the pacing, I think it's very well. It went in really quickly. 2.5 hours flew by for me, which is fantastic to see. And one thing I kind of agreed with. Well, one thing that scared me a little bit about this film is, in a few reviews I saw them saying that there's not a lot of action here, and I was like, oh god, that really worries me, because the action's what I go to see for these films for, right? So that really was a concern. But it is true, there's not an overly huge amount of action. I mean, there's still a third act naturally, but I still think it wasn't really needed. I think the film is probably the most emotional of the Spider-Man trilogies in the MCU, certainly. And like I said, it's full of fan service and doesn't forget what's at the core of this sort of modern trilogy with these characters.
Yeah, it is by far the closest I've come to crying in a Spider-Man film up to this point.
Yeah, no, I'd say I'm the same. You know, it's probably one of the more emotional MCU movies. Not and MCU is not necessarily known for its emotional pulls in its movies, but I'd say this one definitely comes close.
Yeah, there were two moments that sort of got me, and we will go into those in spoilers. Uh,
Yes.
so was there anything else you had for non-spoilers?
No, I think this is a film where, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on whether you've seen it, it is just going to be a spoiler discussion. You know, I think at this present time, it's tough to talk about the film, you know, how I want to without sharing details on it. So nothing else from me, mate. And if there's nothing else from you, um, this goes into the classic massive hitter piece of shit for what is probably our most hyped film of the year.
So, I had the expectation going into this film, I just want to enjoy it. That was the flat expectation that I had. I thought, with everything being speculated on, it's maybe not possible that it can meet the expectation of it being, an insane, mind-blowing, best film ever. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it does meet that expectation, but it without question met the expectation of I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And seeing it in IMAX 3D, completely elevated that. Seeing it amongst an audience of people who were, excited to see it, and sitting beside you, having this new experience of the IMAX 3D, everything to do with that, coupled together, really made for an exciting experience. And I reckon we're probably going to see it again.
Yeah, I
But
want to
like
see it again, definitely.
I think would you probably go for like a standard 2D just to compare the experiences?
I think that'll be really fun. One thing we didn't even mention in our cinema experience is the fact that, you know, I had said to you before, imagine if it just skips the trailers, and lo and behold, just
Hmm.
skip the trailers. Like, I'm not sure whether that
Yeah.
was just for our screening or whether that's general, like, you know, how that IMAX works there. I'm not sure, but that was a real
Hmm.
surprise to me because I was kind of in like trailer mode. I wasn't really on
Hmm.
focusing, and then it was like, whoa, straight in.
Yeah, and it was weird because when we saw West Side Story, they showed trailers for Spider-Man and the Batman, and
Top Gun.
a few
Yeah.
other ones. So I was sort of surprised by that. It was a bit, it was a bit
Yeah,
breakneck to have
it
to have
was.
that experience. Uh, but I do think with the 3D, I do think you lost color, because when I took my 3D glasses off, and then the at the end of these Spider-Man films, they always have like, drawn, sort of like 80s inspired credits. And whenever you took that off and it was a very colorful situation, it was kind of like, oh
Yeah, it was a
God.
bit
And then when you put the
daunting. Yeah,
3D glasses
jarring.
back on and everything there was a bit of a
Hmm.
gray tinge.
I agree.
So I do think we lost a bit of the color. So I would like to see it in 2D. But that being said, an absolute massive hit without question.
Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same. This one is it's full of jokes too. It's full of comedy. Like there's not really a dull moment, really. It's fantastic. I love what they do with the characters. You know, brings back characters from the old movies and takes them in new directions that I feel feels natural still. And you know, all the characters for the most part they feel like themselves from, you know, decades ago, which is great. And yeah, I mean, I definitely want to see it again. I think I want to see it with my dad as well. So I definitely this is definitely going to get a few rewatches out of me before it leaves cinemas, 100%, and then probably a few more times if it comes out in Disney Plus, as these things do. So man, yeah, it's a massive hit. It did not disappoint. It excelled for me, 100%. Now into spoilers. This is
Mhm.
probably going to be quite a long section. I'm not sure how you broke yours down, Callum. I broke mine down into character by character, given that there is quite a lot of them. But if yours are any different, I'm happy to go by yours and just chip in where I can.
I'm happy to go by yours because mine will be number wise
Okay.
insignificant in regards to yours.
Okay. Well, let's start off with the titular character, Spider-Man, Tom Holland. Um, I
I
think
suppose now that we're in the spoiler section, the question is which
with
Spider-Man?
Spider-Man, I know they're back. Yay. Yeah. That was probably, I mean, well, that's definitely a whole section in itself, but Tom Holland Spider-Man, it's easily for him to get out outshone, I think, in this kind of film if they bring back beloved characters like Willem Dafoe, Green Goblin, and you know, Alfred Molina, Doc Ock, and stuff like that, and of course Toby and Andrew. But I think this is Tom Holland's best performance as Spider-Man, and I think the movie does a great job of making sure he is like the Spider-Man, that he's the main one, he's your guy. Do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't introduce the other two Spider-Men too early, and it doesn't do them too late for me. I think they absolutely nail, and they get the idea that this is Tom Holland's movie. You know what I mean? So I think, credit to them for that.
Yeah, I think if the film remained this runtime and they were in it more, I think that they would have been in it too much. But I would have appreciated them tacking on an extra 20 minutes and then
Okay.
having
Yeah.
that 20 minutes have the other Spider-Man. Because I think you probably get enough of Andrew Garfield, but not enough of Tobey Maguire, which is weird because they're on screen for the same amount of time.
Mhm.
But I think that you definitely get a window into the elapsed time more for Andrew than you do for Toby. All that we really get for Toby, and I'm sure you've made reference to all this in their sections in your
No,
notes,
you're
but
good, man. You're good, man.
with Toby, I mean, he basically says, yeah, I mean, I mean, he says me and MJ like made it work, and I'm like, I mean, you know, it's probably not the dream description of a relationship. We don't really get too much of a we don't really get too much of a look in on what his life looks like. But then they make Andrew like this. I don't know how I feel about it. You said at the end of it that Andrew Garfield was your standout amongst the three Spider-Men, and he probably gets the most development, but whether it accurately reflects how I could see that character going after the events of the second one, I don't know. And they have to make one of the three like the sort of he's kind of like the party Thor from Avengers Endgame. He sort
Mm.
of has that motif of he's become like depressed and embittered because of this horrible thing that he let happen, and then sort of hanging around with his pals for one day, he gets like fixed. Like I don't really know how I feel about that.
I think it definitely come across that way. It certainly didn't for me, but I can definitely, understand that. I think what they do with Toby is interesting in regards to he is clearly like, he's clearly, the been there, done that, got the t-shirt Spider-Man. And it's weird because they kind of do a similar thing with Andrew as well, where like, clearly these two Spider-Men are a lot more experienced than Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but um I feel like Toby's Spider-Man is a lot more totally consistent with him. You could like there's a lot of lines that Toby has where you can imagine like them being in a Sam Raimi film, where I'm not sure I could see, a lot of the Andrew lines being from those Mark Webb films. It definitely felt to me like, Andrew Garfield Spider-Man had been like MCUified, whereas Tobey Maguire Spider-Man was still like Raimi Spider-Man for me. Albeit, he's a bit more quippy than usual. Um, that's a thing where I think this movie will come under a little bit of criticism for, is that there is probably a little bit too many jokes. Like there's no real, you know, there's no real moment where the characters were like, there's no real dull moment of the film where the characters aren't making jokes. Like every character in this film has a one-liner. Literally every character in the film has a one-liner. So, I think this film will divide people in terms of, your classic representations of these characters from films years ago, right? So I definitely would agree with you that Andrew feels a lot different to the Mark Webb films, but I personally felt like Andrew Garfield, you can tell he loves playing the character so much. You look at interviews with Andrew Garfield, he says like, I was an honor to play Spider-Man, and you can tell like he's just having a blast with this. And he's a lying wee bastard, Andrew Garfield. He's a good actor. And there's interviews, to be fair to him, like he was like, I didn't
Yeah,
get a call, mate. And lo and
yeah.
behold,
I
he's
mean, either by Monday, people will have seen the film or they'll have the film spoiled for them. I think there's no running from it. Weirdly, if I hadn't seen the film, I actually wouldn't have had it spoiled for me. Like, I've been on Instagram and Facebook since, and I actually haven't had any spoilery posts through. I know that there were some clips uploaded to YouTube,
YouTube's filled with
but
it, mate. Yeah.
I actually haven't had any of them recommended for me. So obviously I had all of it ruined for me by plot leaks. So there was nothing that was a surprise in this film other than the death of Aunt May. But everything else was spoiled for me. But if we remove that idea and it was
Yeah.
just, can I make it to the day of release without it having been spoiled for me by other people that have seen the film, I actually would have managed to avoid all that.
It's worth noting for the viewers as well. This is actually the first time we've talked about this because, as I say, it's only been a couple of days since the film, and we don't usually talk about the film straight after we've seen it because we want to talk about it on the channel. So, I'm hearing Callum's thoughts the first time, as are yous, and yous are hearing mine for the first time, as is Callum. So, I'm intrigued by what you're saying here. There's a lot of things I want to ask you because I know you're a huge Spider-Man fan. You're the biggest comic book fan I know, biggest movie fan I know. So, there's a few things I want to ask you. Did you find it a weird decision that out of the two Spider-Men that they could have introduced first, they chose Andrew and not Toby? Because
Mm.
I feel like Toby, when you introduce Andrew first, like you're gonna get Toby, so the surprise is already ruined. So I think Toby would have been the bigger deal at the time. Although it is worth noting that our cinema went batshit crazy at that, which is another topic we'll get into. But what was your
Mhm.
thoughts on the introductions, mate, and how they dealt with it?
Yeah, it's very interesting because what I assumed would happen was that Andrew Garfield would get introduced first, and then he'd hang around for maybe half an hour before Toby came in, because I assumed they had less time to film with Tobey Maguire. So whenever Andrew shows up, I was thinking, okay, we're gonna get Tobey Maguire then, you know, probably midway through the third act, he's just gonna rock up for the action scene. Uh, but then Toby rocks up, 1 minute, 2 minutes later than Andrew Garfield. So it's not like there was any disparity in how much they were both on set. They were clearly on set for the same amount of time, or at least. I mean, I wonder if any of this was like them being green screened in or anything, because I think obviously with the entrances through the portals, it's very much uh like the all the characters are very rarely in one shot together. It's like Ned and MJ,
Yeah,
and then a shot of Andrew speaking, and then it's cutting back and forward between them. So unless I know Andrew like physically interacts with the scene by like crawling up the ceiling, but I think Tobey Maguire doesn't actually do that. So he may have just been green screened in.
yeah. I think with Toby as well. You know, it surprised me, even though those movies are like decades old, like how much people still love him and love the
Mhm.
character so much. So that was really heartwarming to see.
He was looking good. He was looking handsome.
He was looking really handsome. He looks I'll be honest, he looks in probably the best shape I've seen him in probably since like the first Spider-Man. Like he looks in great shape. Yeah, I mean, I think as well, one thing that was a little bit, of not jarring, but a little bit like surprising was how different they sound. I think naturally because times past they're going to sound different, but that's just a comment I felt like I had to make. Toby doesn't have as much lines probably as Andrew, but from what he did, like you could tell he looked and sounded different, but nevertheless the character still remained there. Like for me, it still felt like Peter Parker from the Raimi films.
Yeah, maybe they felt they needed to introduce Andrew first, because they thought he needed the bigger moment because they owed him more.
That's
Obviously,
interesting.
Andrew Garfield was sort of, you know, axed from the franchise, in an untimely fashion. Uh, you know, I think we both saw the redeeming qualities in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. It was very much a comic book brought to life. It was convoluted and it was messy. But sometimes that creates a really fun experience. I mean, obviously, Electro isn't a character that's well done. But if you can laugh and joke, at the film's expense,
Yeah,
uh,
100%.
sometimes that creates an even more fun experience. And I think no one ever questioned how great of a Spider-Man Andrew Garfield was. They maybe thought, oh, he's too cool to be this, you know, uh, this ridiculed nerd, because he's clearly, like a cool, handsome skater boy. Like all the girls would be naturally fawning over him. So, it didn't really line up with, you know, what Peter Parker means to most people. But I think that everybody always saw the potential in him. And it was sad whenever he was
Yeah, it
let go.
was.
And then it was sort of done with this, very utilitarian, quick turnaround where his franchise was completely axed, and then less than 2 years later, we were having
I felt bad
Spider-Man in
for
the
him.
MCU.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then people sort of just mentally like left him in the dust because they were like, oh, we've moved on to better
Old
things. We now
news
get
kind
to
of
see
thing. Yeah.
Spider-Man with the Avengers. And I think a lot of people didn't take Andrew Garfield's feelings into account. So I'm glad that he got his due in this film, and I'm sure sure he's happy with how it went. You know, I'm sure he had a hand in the creative aspect of it, because you know no one's going to know his iteration of the character better than him. Uh, but with the mentioning of you know, this sort of statute of limitations on spoilers, what at what period do you think Andrew Garfield can take interviews about this film?
That's something I'm not too sure on. You know, I think this is going to be a film where a lot of people are going to want to see in the opening couple of days. So I feel like, any time after this weekend, you're going to start seeing people interview Andrew Garfield online, I think. And Tobey Maguire doesn't really do interviews, so I don't think you'll see much of him, to be honest. But I think Andrew Garfield will do quite a few. I just I hope he doesn't get a lot of hate because for like lying in the videos, because at the end of the
He
day,
should have lied. I mean, you
he's
know,
an actor
he's
and also
preserving the
like
integrity of the film.
exactly, mate. One thing I really wanted to comment on about um the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man is I feel like he has the best moment in the film for me, in my opinion. There's a fantastic
Get
moment.
stabbed.
There's a fantastic moment in the trailer where I say fantastic as if like I'm so bloodthirsty, where like MJ is kind of like falling from the Statue of Liberty, and like you think it's Tom Holland, Peter Parker is going to save her, but in the film it's Andrew, and it's a really beautiful moment where you kind of get the Gwen Stacy reference, of course, and it's he probably has some of the most emotional scenes because you kind of get the idea that he's you know I don't know, you just kind of get the idea that he's quite like an insecure Spider-Man still. Like, he says like, "I love you guys" to the other two. And it's a really tender, beautiful moment for the character. And I definitely feel like his interactions as well with the villains were still exceptionally good as well, especially with Jamie Foxx's Electro.
But then with the like, you know, love you guys kind of thing, like do you get what I mean? Where it seemed like they had to make one of them like the
Goof.
sort of like the, you know, the like soppy, like clingy one, you know, and they
They
sort
couldn't
of
have done it with
defaulted
Toby, I
that
don't
to
think.
Andrew.
I think Andrew's the
No,
only one who could have
they
done it with.
couldn't have. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then obviously like Tom Holland's Peter's still like reeling from the death of Aunt May like 2 hours ago.
Mm.
So you know, I suppose the only one that lines up with, if you have to have that, is Andrew Garfield. But I suppose the question is, do you have to have that? And then in the end, does it even matter? Because did they forget he exists? We'll go on to talk about that, I'm sure. Uh, but yeah, with the moment where Andrew Garfield's Peter catches MJ, that was the second moment that sort of had me, you know, nearly
Hmm.
nearly crying, because like the acting on his face, it's very quickly edited, you know, where
It's
he
very
just
subtle.
lands, catches her, and then you know the realization on his face where he, you know, starts to cry himself, like, and MJ asks him, are you all right? Like that did get me, because the Amazing Spider-Man 2 for some reason does hold like a special place in my heart.
Yeah,
Like
I really like it.
I would happily watch that now. Uh, and you know, it really meant something to me, that scene. The unfortunate thing is that even without the plot leaks, that was that like, you know, that was guessed. Even
Hmm.
before the trailer where we see MJ falling, people said, "Oh, I reckon MJ is gonna fall and then Andrew Garfield's gonna catch her." Like that was predicted, you know, before any footage was seen, before any scripts were written. You know, people were like, "It's gonna be a multiverse story with the villains. That means Andrew Garfield's gonna be in it. That means he's gonna get into a position where he catches MJ, you know, and catches her in the way
It
that he
felt
should have
natural at
caught
the
Gwen."
time.
Yeah, and you know, it absolutely fits in the film, but then, you know, it's just indicative of how little there is that acts as a surprise in the film.
That's a great point. I feel I feel as though, especially with breakdowns of the trailers and stuff, like there's when people matched up the set leaks of Andrew and stuff and Toby, you could match it up. I said this to you after the film. You could match it up with scenes in the film, like Andrew in the trailer breakdowns. People said like, do you think, like, people were questioning whether he thinks like Toby has like web blood or something, but in the film it's like web block, so it's very similar. And of course that scene where like the three Spider-Men are facing off against Lizard, Sandman, and Electro. Of course, people thought that the other two had been edited out and that Andrew was kicking Lizard. Of course, that ended up being true. So there's very little left to the imagination really in terms of theories for the film, when people really got it spot on, to be honest with you, for the most part.
But like, why would Marvel, like, you know, I get that to have that money shot in the trailer of just Tom Holland, you then need to remove Andrew Garfield and you need to remove Tobey Maguire.
Hmm.
And then in the US version of that trailer, that's where it ends. But then
Yes.
it's in the, I believe, the Brazilian trailer
Brazilian,
where
yeah.
you see Lizard's face move and get kicked in the face by the then removed, but you know, by the since removed Andrew Garfield.
Hmm.
But like, who at Marvel said,
I thought that was a good idea.
yeah, who said, yeah, make that shot for a trailer, but don't use it in the US one, but still take Andrew Garfield out of that? Like, why didn't they watch that back and then go, oh, I mean, yeah, we haven't edited out the part where Lizard gets kicked in the face by an invisible person. Like, I don't
I
know if
think
they
that's
thought that was a good idea.
I think that's genuinely just a blatant editing mistake. I think that it's
But how
just
do you make a
a cock
mistake
up.
when you have to spend thousands of dollars
I'm not
or,
sure.
you know, tens of thousands of dollars editing them out? Like, you know, why
It
would you
makes no sense
continue
that
to
it's not a
keep editing
mistake.
them out past the point where it doesn't make any visual sense?
Yes, yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that one. I completely agree. One thing as well, on the three Spider-Man section of the review is that what was your thoughts on their interactions with their respective villains? Because of course Andrew has Electro and Lizard, and Toby has Sandman, Green Goblin, and Doc Ock. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was interesting because I would have liked, you know, obviously we get a Sinister Five, you know, I think a sixth member that was, you know, meaningful to Tom Holland's maybe would have tied it all together. You know, I think, you know, if you have, uh, you know, Toby with his three villains, Andrew with his two, and then Tom with his one, you know, I think that maybe would have tied it together. And I mean, it's not like I'd say Reese Ifans gets like, you know, 7 or 8 lines in this film. You know, you could have any of Tom Holland's like rogues gallery and just give them a bit of screen time, and you maybe would have tacked on a few extra minutes to the film, and
Hmm.
then I think that would have just tied together why he has to be there and why, you know, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield couldn't just clean up the mess themselves. Uh, with Andrew Garfield, you know, I think his, you know, he always did want to be a friend to Electro. You know, he made an effort with Max Dillon. So then when he turned evil, you know, that kind of broke his heart a little. So I was sort of very happy to see the redemption of that character. Although we'll talk about the actual connotations of what that means for the future of those characters in regards to whether they live. Uh, you know, the characters that we see here and Spider-Man villains in general are often, you know, misfits of science, you know, where they're driven insane by some mistake in a laboratory.
I poke
So
fun
they're
at
very
that, to be
often,
fair. Don't they,
yeah.
in this
So
film?
they're yeah. I would say Jamie Foxx brings a lot of levity, you know, especially with like his comments about falling in the vat of electric eels. You know, he has some of the best lines in the film, I think. But you know, his villains are always meant to be sympathetic, and I think the fact that they were all cured and redeemed by the end, or I mean, not necessarily redeemed. Uh, I would say everyone's, you know, fairly reconciled with, aside from Green Goblin, because there isn't really a moment where he, you know, he says what have I done, and then they're gone. You know, he doesn't really have a moment to sit in that, or you know, a chance for, you know, forgiveness to be given, or anything like that. You know, for Tom Holland to say that, you know, he's able to separate what the Goblin did from who Norman Osborn is, who is, you know, like, you know, uh, a victim of the Goblin. You know, he's just, you know, the Goblin's just, you know, using his body as a vessel. Um, so I mean, it was pretty fascinating to see them lock back into that. Weirdly, you know, in the original trilogy, Green Goblin is probably Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man's most personal villain, and I don't think they even exchange a line of dialogue with each other in this film. You know, what I
Yeah,
mean,
they don't.
you know, Green Goblin stabs him, but you know, I don't think any words are exchanged. I mean, you could argue that Sandman's his most personal villain because that turned out to be who killed Uncle Ben, but
Hmm.
they don't even really they don't even mention that in the film. So I would have. I mean, they mentioned that, you know, he wanted the guy who killed his uncle dead, and you know, he, you know, made sure that the guy who he thought did it ended up dead. So it's not like, you know, it's not like they're retconning the fact that he knows that Flint Marko actually killed his uncle, but we don't hear that we don't hear that explicitly said, and you know, it's
Yeah.
not really it's not really apparent in the shared dialogue. I thought Flint Marko his behavior was bizarre because he says he has a daughter to get back to, but then he's helping fight the Spider-Men who are trying to get them sent home. Like, it makes no sense to me unless they sort of never really go into it, because obviously we have Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, those three we have seen their deaths, but Lizard and Sandman we haven't. The implication is that all five of them die fighting Spider-Man, so maybe Sandman and Lizard were also going back to a time that we haven't seen yet in Toby and Andrew's timelines where they actually do end up dead. So maybe he was fighting back because he also thought that he was going back to his death. But that's sort of it's never that's what the trailer says. It says they all die fighting Spider-Man, but that line of dialogue isn't in the film. They just say that I think they say specific characters have died fighting Spider-Man. So do you think that Sandman and Lizard were also being sent to their deaths?
I think that Sandman's introduction is very curious because his introduction, he like protects who he thinks is Tobey Maguire Spider-Man from Electro, which leads me to think that this is Sandman after Spider-Man 3. But then in that case, he just is clearly an arsehole throughout the film. So like I'm not too sure what the connotation is, because I thought the Sandman character was going to be the one who would get killed in the film. Like, I thought him and Doc Ock would like team up with the other Spider-Men to defeat the other ones, but that's not the case really. I was confused really with Sandman because like I always thought that these characters were all taken from like the end of their timelines really, but then clearly the Lizard isn't, because he's like the Lizard and not Dr. Connors, and clearly Sandman isn't because he's kind of a villainous Sandman. Do you get me?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it must be that the last time we saw Lizard was in 2014, and it's now 20, what is it in the MCU? It's now 2024.
Yeah.
So it's been 10 years since we've seen Lizard. So I suppose in Andrew Garfield's 2021, Kurt Connors might have become the Lizard again and then gotten killed, and then he's been picked from that part of his timeline, and then Sandman could have been Sandman could have gone back to his villainous ways in Tobey Maguire's 2012 or something, and then that's the point that he's been plucked from. I think some of the logic with where they've been time displaced from doesn't exactly match up, and then obviously we'll talk about the fact of they get cured, but does that mean they're saved? I'm sure we'll talk about that after we've dissected some more about the character specific notes that you have.
Yeah, I think one avenue that this film really surprised me is that it made me realize that Doc Ock and Green Goblin never actually they never actually talk or meet each other in the original Raimi film. So I thought it was a really interesting avenue to take, that Doc Ock is aware of Norman Osborn's villainous presence as Green Goblin. Did you find that surprising as well? Because like Norman Osborn kind of says that he's kind of famous in this universe for like just being a crazy scientist who like turn himself into the supervillain. And it's when I think of the Raimi films, I think those films so separately from each other that I never really considered that they actually are a universe where like these things happened in all three of these movies. So I think Doc Ock's interactions with everyone was fascinating, really.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely makes no sense because it obviously stands to reason that Doc Ock would know who Norman Osborn is, because he worked with Harry on the Power of the Sun project in Spider-Man 2. But it isn't until the end of Spider-Man 2 that Harry even finds out that his dad was Green Goblin, and then Doc Ock is taken from the end of Spider-Man 2. So it was never reported by the media, it was never public knowledge that Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin, but then he's like, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. And I'm like, how do you know that if Harry didn't even know that, and he's the one who, was personally delivered his stabbed corpse?
I think Willem Dafoe Green Goblin is definitely a real strong highlight of the film. I mean, the Norman Osborn personality, I have a few questions about that, but he certainly gets a lot more to do. I was just wondering if you thought, like, was that Green Goblin just pretending to be Norman Osborn the whole time, or do you think like the Norman Osborn with Aunt May was generally Norman Osborn or not?
That's interesting. I think because he smash the mask. I think at the point where he was at feast with Aunt May, I do think that that was legitimately Norman Osborn. But then I don't know at what point the change happened. Obviously, it must have been at at some point whenever they were in Happy's apartment, I guess.
Hmm.
But then there isn't really logic, between when is he the Green Goblin, when is he not? Because normally, if he isn't juiced up with the Goblin serum, he only experiences discussions with the Goblin like in his head. He doesn't become the Goblin unless he's had the serum. And I don't think he actually takes the serum at any point in the film until they're at the apartment. So I don't know. I have no idea when that turn happened. I
Yeah,
would have maybe liked, a bit more of an explicit moment of that.
I think it's ironic that like you know he tries to kill Aunt May in the first Spider-Man, doesn't he? And then here obviously does kill Aunt May. That was a real surprise of the film for me. I didn't really expect that whatsoever. I knew someone was going to
Hmm.
die, but I thought it might have been like Happy Hogan or something, or maybe one of the Sinister Six, like we've mentioned. What was your thoughts on that scene? Because it really was indicative of how evil this Norman Osborn was and like how much of a villain he is. But in a way, I really appreciated that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it took me by surprise that it was Aunt May that died. I was also expecting Happy, because that was those were the leaks that I had heard. But to my knowledge, I mean, they say that they filmed multiple ideas of who died, but like, how do you do that? Like, uh, if it's Happy, then how do you link the three Spider-Men together of the lesson of of with great power comes great responsibility? Like, how do you have that scene, which is such a pivotal one to that connection between the three of them, without the death of Aunt May? Because in this film, Aunt May takes the place in this universe of Uncle Ben, where it's the idea that, you know, Uncle Ben, or the mentor figure in Peter's life, has a responsibility to impart this lesson and then die, so that they can uh take that message on board. So do you think there ever was an Uncle Ben?
Well,
Obviously, there's a,
that's an
a tease of
interesting.
that with the briefcase, which is embossed, the briefcase in Spider-Man Far From Home, which is like embossed with his initials. But obviously he doesn't have a role to play if we already have, you know, if we already have a relative of his who has imparted this lesson and died. Uncle Ben doesn't really matter anymore.
I feel like this, with the speculation of other Spider-Men appearing in it, that connection was going to have to be addressed. And the other two previous Tom Holland films kind of do, skirt around it. They don't really address it directly, of course. So I think here having Aunt May say the classic line is really refreshing. I really enjoyed it, and it made sense. But it kind of makes me think like what lesson or what happened in Peter Parker's life that he decided to become Spider-Man in the first place? Like, did he just decide that he's got these powers? He's just gonna, become a superhero, which I think that's fine, but I think just
Yeah, because he should
logistically it
learn that
doesn't.
lesson at the start of his career, not years in.
Yes, that's the issue there. Now I feel like that scene where they all share about that, their respective lives, and Uncle Ben's and Gwen Stacy's and stuff like that's probably the best scene in the film for me. Like that's absolutely marvelous, but I still feel like it's like it's too little too late for Tom Holland Spider-Man in the sense that like they really I think they're probably I think they're probably regretting not doing Uncle Ben in a sense because they kind of teased it and I don't feel like they knew what to do with it, especially because Spider-Man Homecoming was so recent after the Amazing Spider-Man one that they maybe felt like audiences were sick of Uncle Ben, but I feel like that character is so integral to Spider-Man as is Aunt May that you just couldn't not do it. So he was always going to get that with great power comes great responsibility line. It's just I was surprised in how they did it actually here in a sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, really, how does it work? So Aunt May is normally normally she is the wife of Peter's dad's brother. So in this universe, if there's no Uncle Ben, is there any way that they could be aunt and uncle without being biologically related? I'm just gonna confuse myself here. Like she
Spider-Man
must have
family
had,
trees.
like, if we're assuming that they aren't biologically related, she does, I think, need then some marital connection. But is it possible that, like, does it work if, I think what
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
if there's no Uncle Ben, she has to be one of his parents' siblings then, right? That's how it works, right?
Yeah, I think so. Unless there's no marital connection, of course. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, she could just be, Aunt May, and she could be like a family friend or something. Like Aunt doesn't extend to blood.
Yeah.
They say that she's, they say in this film that, she's his guardian, but
Hmm.
that, you know, and anyone can, be your aunt if you call them that. So I mean,
Hmm.
she may well have just been, the best friend of his parents or something.
Hmm. Yes, I think so. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I think another point where I nearly cried at the film is when Toby mentions Uncle Ben. Cliff Robertson Uncle Ben is probably one of my favorite film characters ever. So just to hear that referenced is was a really touching moment for me as well. I did I did laugh a little bit inside when like Toby says like, oh, Uncle Ben says it, and then he looks over at Andrew, and I was like, Andrew, Uncle Ben didn't say anything. Uncle
I
Ben
know.
fucked it. Like,
Uncle Ben said, uh, and if you have the power to do those things, then you have the moral obligation to do those things.
yeah,
And then what?
exactly.
Yeah, when he was like, Uncle
Andrew's
Ben
like,
said
yeah,
that,
I
but
felt it.
before he died, I'm like, no, he didn't.
Yeah, I know. That's mad, crazy.
But yeah,
Um,
just the idea that they cast Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben and J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Like, J. Jonah Jameson gets so many shout outs, but like Cliff Robertson is like the unsung hero of that film, I
oh,
reckon.
100%. 100%. My favorite line stuff from that film was like, oh, I want to drive to the library. I need the exercise. That's still like an absolute classic. Like makes fuck all sense, but I still love it nonetheless. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and then you also love his appearance in Spider-Man 2, right?
yeah,
Because
I do.
the
Yeah.
the sort of blockade to me enjoying Spider-Man 2 as much as everybody else does is probably the existential crisis of, you know, how much should it be in Spider-Man, and that leads to him losing his powers. I don't know that I love that. I do. I am desperate to rewatch it. I really wanted to rewatch it before seeing this film, but it's the only one that isn't on Netflix,
Yeah.
because apparently the rights are owned by like Channel 4 or some shit in the UK, so they don't have it on Netflix. But I am desperate to rewatch that because I think I will enjoy it a lot more than when I last saw it.
And I love the way that the characters make fun of, silly versions of them in previous films. Like Toby makes fun of the existential crisis stuff in this film. And I think they also make fun of the lizard's appearance. That or maybe no, maybe not the lizard. No, who do they make fun of?
Electro.
Electro. Yes, they make fun of Electro's appearance, don't they? Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, I think what with the fan service and the references to previous films, they absolutely smashed it. Like, there's a great scene where Tobey Maguire and Alfred Molina interact again, and you can just tell, although it's been years since those actors have been together, like the chemistry's still there. Like it's absolutely remarkable. And I think I just wish that scene was played for longer. Like that there's so much great callbacks in there, and they do reuse some of the great scores, not as much as I would have liked, but they still do reuse a lot of great scores, which is lovely to see as well.
Yeah, because I mean, I couldn't tell you what the score is for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. If I heard it, I wouldn't recognize it, but I would absolutely recognize Tom Holland's and Tobey Maguire's. And I just think if they had just played the unadulterated version of Tobey Maguire's theme, I don't know where it would have slotted in, just because Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire sort of have a shared introduction in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, really, I think everybody pictured, his introduction being, him swinging through somewhere, and then the music slowly builds, and you realize, oh fuck, Tobey Maguire's about to show up, and then he swings by on screen. I think that movie would have played a bit better, because I always thought, whenever people were talking about the idea of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire coming back, and when people made memes or edits of it, they always had them like coming through a Doctor Strange portal, and I always thought like, oh, imagine how lackluster that's going to be, and that's actually how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I thought that was a strange choice. I feel like if they just had them join the action rather than we're gonna potter through a portal and have a chat, like I don't know, it was just played a bit weird. And if that's what like people were doing in like memes and edits, you would have thought maybe they could have had something a bit more that acted as a bit more of a spectacle.
I can see why they did it in regards to wanting to give them a bit more downtime before they finally stood up. There's some really nice tender moments when like they're all like nerding out in the high school
Hmm.
science lab and
I think
stuff,
that's
and
my favorite scene of the film.
that's fantastic because there's a really funny moment where like Ned's trying to communicate with Tom Holland and Peter Parker, but they're all Peter Parker, so it's remarkable. And I mean, it's I think all the actors surprisingly have great chemistry with each other. Like you can tell they're all having a great time. I'm sure Tom Holland was having an amazing time himself, being a boyhood Spider-Man fan. Um, but in regards to spoiler notes, I don't really have. I just have general stuff, like cameos and general plot points and things like that.
Yeah.
Mine aren't really character based really so far anymore. We've kind of done that. If that's good for you, I'd happily go
Yeah, no
by
problem.
yours now.
Yeah, so I don't have too much further to say, but you'll keep it going, I'm sure. So I was disappointed, obviously, in regards to what was left as a surprise, but obviously that, in no way is the fault of the film. It's the fault of, the people who were leaking stuff, and uh I mean, it's not the fault of people who speculated. I mean, just because people happened to guess that, Andrew Garfield was going to catch MJ, whenever that happened, I was like, oh yeah, had heard that like 2 years ago. But that was just a blind guess. Like,
Mhm.
that was with, based on no evidence or leaks. So I mean, you can't really believe like no one's to blame for that. It was just a good guess, or or maybe that like the fact that like you know unprofessional fans were able to come up with like essentially the plot of this film before it was written, like does that reflect that it's maybe not the best? I mean, yeah,
Predictable, maybe it's the word.
yeah, it's hard to say because obviously they gave us exactly what we wanted, but exactly what we wanted, if we were able to, verbalize exactly what we wanted, we've essentially been able to communicate the plot of the film as well as the professional screenwriters of it. If you know what I mean.
We deserve a
Uh,
cut of the film's box office. What you're
oh yeah,
saying?
course. But if
I know what you mean.
people have sort of said that fan service can be a negative thing, and I suppose this is an example of that where the fan service is something that's guessable. Like no one was surprised when Captain America, caught Mjolnir in Avengers Endgame, but because it was a comic moment, so it was it matched up with what was in the comics. So you can't exactly say, oh well, that didn't surprise me because they're pulling from source material. But here it was something that happened in other movies, so people were
Yeah.
guessing how it would come over here. So I don't know. That's how I feel about it. But what I would have really liked as a preserved surprise would have been Daredevil. I would have really loved if that was the first time I saw or heard of that. I'd heard well, not intentionally, like it was relayed to me by whatever means. I have no memory, but I heard, exactly how that scene was going to play out. So that was just a bit of a letdown for me. But again, not the fault of the film whatsoever.
Still a fantastic scene, I feel. And I when I saw the leaked photo of that, I thought it looked really fake, but I kind of feel bad saying that now because it obviously was legit. Yeah, it's a really great scene. He got a few like gasps in the cinema, I feel, when he showed up. And I don't even feel like you need to have seen the TV show to know who Matt Murdock is. Like Daredevil was a very well-known character, so I think that's going to be huge for the film. And he's only in it for like a minute. Like I'm surprised they didn't bring him back towards the end or anything like that. But it's a big surprise. Another character that the film has and goes in a bit more detail with is J. Jonah Jameson, because obviously I think he's introduced in Far From Home, isn't he? And that was kind of the
Mhm.
the Daredevil cameo of that film where like that fans went crazy for him. Um, I still feel like it's not traditional J. Jonah Jameson, but I still enjoy like the wacky conspiracy theorist who like shoots it out of his back office or something with like a small time film crew. And there's a gorgeous shot of like Tom Holland and like the New York skyline with like just J. Jonah Jameson just berating him on this TV screen, and it's actually like one of the posters in Russia I had saw
Mhm.
before the movie had came out, and it's a fantastic shot just in the rain. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Like if they did a portrait version of that, I'd love to have that on my wall. Like it
Hmm.
it is really incredible. So there was a moment in the film that we said we were going to talk about, and I said that I took umbrage with, but it was in the
Let's do it.
cinema rather than in the film, and that was the introduction of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, leading to applause. So you know we live we live in Northern Ireland, so we sort of have a lot of the sensibilities that are sort of associated with British politeness of we're all like respectful and quiet. Nobody talks, I assume, in the way that people maybe would in America, because I've heard a lot of people say that's a bigger issue in other places. We are sort of very very quiet and reserved, I think, here. So that there's never really any boisterous behavior in the cinema. uh, there there were people talking when I saw Avengers Infinity War, and then in Avengers Endgame it was silence. But here it was silence for 95% of the time. But then as soon as the two of them rocked up, it was I'm not going to do it because uh
Yeah.
it's past midnight. So I'm not gonna replicate it. But yeah, it was you know whoops and wheeze and clapping of the hand, and I was thinking like, what the fuck is
It's the
this?
first time
You
I've ever
know,
experienced that before.
yeah, it's just that
I
there's a
liked
really
it.
good Mr. Sunday Movies video about it. Where where he talks about cinema etiquette, and it's a video I'd highly recommend. And I know they're just having a bit of fun. They're showing their appreciation for it, but you know I think when it encroaches on the dialogue, that is an issue. Because then you are like you're affecting other people's viewing experience. If there was like a lull, in dialogue where they made room for people with the expectation that people are going to clap, fair enough. Well, I mean, not fair enough. I would have still been a bit irritated, but I'm kind of just a bit of an old
You're old
grouch.
school. You're old
Yeah,
school.
I'm a bit of a like 80-year-old like get off my lawn kind of guy. Like these kids these days. I'm a bit of a grump. So that kind of thing does irritate me. But it encroached on the dialogue. Like I would never be like, you can't laugh in the cinema because that's noise and you're covering the dialogue. I'm like, well, a laugh is a social thing, but it's also not necessarily controllable. You are choosing to clap and be like, woo, I'm excited to see Tobey Maguire here. And I'm like, well, I haven't just heard, I've just missed the first thing that he said in his historic re-entry into the character of Spider-Man. Like I have no idea what his first line of dialogue was.
I think it felt quite startling to me because the whole cinema was silent for up to that point. But I personally enjoyed it. But when you look at
Like
it,
I probably sound like such a
no, you
like
don't,
such
because
an
I don't think
asshole.
you do. Because when you look at it, it makes no sense because Toby and Andrew aren't actually there to watch you watch the film. Like they're not there. Like, yeah, we're there, guys. We're on the screen. Like it makes no sense why people would do that. But I still like it anyway because I love that character so much, and I can usually I wouldn't really like it, but I can make an exception for it because inside I was feeling the exact same thing. I just wouldn't have the courage to be the first person to whoop. Like imagine if you're like imagine if you're just like thinking, oh, do I whoop and clap here, and then you do it, and like no one else does it. Like you're looked at as a lunatic or something in the cinema there. But nonetheless, huge cheer, and that's the first time I've ever experienced that before, and it was a really great moment for me personally. I really enjoyed like having that experience because it's something that you see on these American theaters where people go wild, and a lot of American cinemas like take the biscuit with it. Like they're like yelling through the whole action scene, you can't tell what's going on. But here, it was over pretty briefly, which I was glad with. But I still appreciated the warm response that Toby and Andrew got.
Yeah, I think less people clapped with Andrew, but I honestly think that was probably them like feeling out whether it was acceptable in the cinema to do that.
Hmm.
Because like I've obviously seen a massive amount of like these big event films like on the day of release, sometimes midnight screenings, and no one has ever clapped at anything. So this was a real shock. So I think that the first one where they were like, okay, maybe this is an appropriate thing to do. Like I think a few of them were like, ooh, and then by Toby it was like, they're like, okay, I mean, a few dozen people are clapping. I'm gonna really go for this.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's just not for me. Like I think, as I've said, really, you know, my issue isn't with people enjoying themselves. My issue is with it encroaching on you hearing the dialogue, because in that kind of scene, the dialogue is more important than the visual. You know,
Hmm.
they're appreciating the visual, but I also want to hear what Tobey Maguire has to
Of
say as his
course.
first line in the MCU.
Of course. Yeah, I respect that. I respect that.
I mean, we'll find it out when we see it again, I suppose.
Yeah, we will. We will. I'll be interested to see what the audience reception is there.
So the whole process of Tom Holland trying to work out in this film how to cure the villains so that when he sends them back into their universes they don't die. This is very interesting. So the likes of, you know, Andrew Garfield interacts with his Electro and says sort of like see you later, as though they're going back to the same universe. But when Andrew Garfield goes back to his universe, he'll still be in a timeline, because, you know, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire aren't time displaced, they're just space displaced, whereas the villains are time and space displaced, you know, where they've come to this new universe, but they're also, you know, one's coming from 2002 and another universe, one's coming from 2000, 2004 and another universe, whereas Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield seem to be from whatever version of the present day it is for them. So when they go back, it's going to be 2024 for them, and you know, when Andrew Garfield goes back to 2024 in his universe, Electro still in his universe will have died in 2014. So that means that I assume this is extending on from the Avengers Endgame explanation of how time and universes work, where by curing these villains and sending them back to their universe, he's sending them back to a new branch timeline
Hmm.
universe
Hmm.
where they go back and they're cured and they're no longer evil. So, you know, when Doc Ock goes back to, well, I mean, when he goes back to his universe, he's going to be cured, but the device is still going to be there, about to blow up the universe. So like, because he
He's
now
got
doesn't
one
even
less
have
tentacle
control.
as well. He's
Yeah,
fucked it.
if he still has control of the arms, he can still sacrifice himself. But then the whole point of trying to save him wasn't worth it. And also, because you haven't really saved anyone. You've saved the physical people in front of you, like these people that you can see that are tangible, and you can see
Hmm.
they are going to go back to now a universe where they don't die.
Hmm.
But Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield act like they're saving their past version, that like their past villains. But when they go back to their universes, they're still dead in their past.
Yeah.
Like they're going back to, like the whole point is to send these villains home. But they're not going home. They're going to these new branch universes,
Yeah. Throughout the film, I couldn't really help
to
but
my understanding.
yeah, throughout the film, like I couldn't help but agree with Doctor Strange that like Tom Holland, Peter Parker, although he's like a really good guy, like he probably should have left it because like
They should have died. I'm gonna put it
I'm
out
gonna
there.
put
He
it out
should
there
he
as
should have
well.
just
I think
pushed
I
that
think
button.
Tom Holland Spider Man fucked it for himself because he should have just said this is their fate. Because if you start messing with that, then like it's not fair who you're choosing to like help live, and like in that case like you should help everyone, right? So it's
Yeah.
like it's I Doctor Strange wasn't as annoying as I thought he would be in the film. Like I think it was a smart move to market him a lot to take the eye away from obviously the speculation with Toby and Andrew. So I think Doctor Strange is marketed probably a little bit too much actually. Like you go in and think this is a team up film and it's anything but that. Like Doctor Strange is not in this a lot. It's surprising because he's like on the poster, right? So that's
Yeah, he's,
bizarre.
he's dispatched within the first probably like
But
50
good.
minutes or an hour,
I was
right?
quite glad of that to be honest, because I didn't really want him to
Don't love
drag
him.
Peter Parker down a little bit. But that being said, I still think he was pretty good. Like it wasn't overly annoying or anything.
Yeah, with them going back to their universe, it's like, you know, he hasn't changed. He's changed, as I said, like he's changed the fate of the people in front of him, but the
Hmm.
people in front of him aren't the original versions of the universe they've come from. Like they'll have been immediately replaced by, time will fix itself so that in Tobey Maguire's universe, like Doc Ock didn't disappear, during their fight, like, you know, a new branch timeline's been created where he did and then he came back. But, you know, our concern was sort of, were they going to follow that logic, and was Doc Ock's sacrifice from Spider-Man 2 going to be sullied? Was that going to remove Spider-Man 2 from canon. Like, was this going to be now, that happened, but now these events have changed that. But that's actually not the case. Like, when we watch Spider-Man 2, that's the Tobey Maguire that we see in this film, who does go back to his timeline, but those events that happened in his 2002 still stand.
Hmm.
And now this redeemed and cured Doc Ock is going back to a branch timeline. I think that's the only way that it makes sense.
Yeah,
I
I
think that
agree
I
with
think
you on
that
that
must
one.
that must be it, right?
Yeah, I think you've smashed it. Yeah, I think that's what I'll go with.
So I think I've expended all of my notes on the actual, duration of the film, and I only really have comments on the post credit scenes. Did you have anything further on
No,
the
let's do
actual
it.
film?
No, let's.
Aside from if you want to talk about the fact that another thing that was just predicted was there was a set photo of Peter Parker in the snow holding a piece of paper with MJ working at the coffee shop. And then people predicted, you know, 2 years ago or whatever, or a year and a half ago, people were like, "Oh, I bet that Tom Holland, I bet that Peter Parker's been removed from everybody's memory, and he has to go and see MJ to like get her to remember him." And then that happened in the film. And I was like,
That's
"For fuck's
crazy.
sake! Like,
Maybe
how was
maybe they
this
just
guessed?"
did get fan theories, mate, and just put them into all together and just yeah, they just blended everything in. I think this really resets the canon back to basics, really, for back to classic Spider-Man. He's got the new suit. He's got there's a
Love
fucking
it.
lot of new suits in this film. That really pissed me off, actually. Like a new suit every fucking scene. But yeah, so like he's got like a new sort of really shiny blue and red suit, which I really hope they stick with. Please don't give us another Iron Spider or nonsense. I like this.
Yeah,
I
it looks
really
it
like the
looks
new one.
a bit shiny and metallic, so I don't know if I love that, but I do love, a cloth suit, bare basics,
Yeah, I love
friendly
this.
neighborhood Spider-Man.
And it's like it's Spider-Man, like he's probably struggling with his rent, like he's in his own apartment now. It's very much like I think it resets it if they want to do a different love interest as well, because although they say that Tom Holland and Zendaya's versions of these characters, like Peter Parker will find this MJ again, I think it resets the canon to maybe introduce like a Black Cat or something, or like a Gwen Stacy or Liz Allen again if they wanted to, because I feel like that Liz Allen and like Vulture story hasn't closed yet. I feel like that's still something there. So um what's your thoughts on that? Like, do you feel like they are just gonna kind of not bin off MJ and Ned, but maybe leave them as side characters and introduce new characters, like like Black Cat or Liz, or reintroducing Liz Allen again? Like, where do you think they're gonna go with this now?
I mean, clearly, it's been a consistent theme throughout these three films that, they end on a what the fuck moment, quite literally in the first two films.
Mm,
They end with Aunt May finding out he's Peter Parker. Then they have the whole world finding out he's they have Aunt May figure out he's Spider-Man. They have the world find out that he's Spider-Man. And in this film, we have the world forget who Peter Parker is. And each time that they've covered it, they've spent the first third of the next film sorting that out. So I think they haven't made any changes to reality. Doctor Strange hasn't he hasn't warped reality. He hasn't got the help of Wanda or anything. No insane Omega level magic has been used. It's just he's brainwashed everybody to forget. So I feel like that can definitely be undone. I just don't know how you don't. I don't know how you do it without it being eye rolling. Eye roll inducing. I think bringing him back to the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is genius, and how they've done that is really smart. Uh, but I think that they are pitching MJ as like his as his one true love, his soulmate. That kind of seems to be what they're pitching, and I think the fans would riot if they tried to pair him with anyone else. So I think that they're probably gonna try and resolve it if they do continue to make these films. And I don't see why they wouldn't, unless they hate money. I don't know why they wouldn't continue doing it. I think you've got to do maybe two more Tom Holland films, and then the third one is him passing the baton to Miles Morales. That seems to me,
mm-hmm.
what would make the most sense, or even passing the baton to Miles Morales and in the first or second one of the new trilogy. I think you need more time with Tom Holland, and I think you need to resolve this issue. Like I don't think he can just continue to live in a world that doesn't know him.
Does that mean all
Because
the
then,
Avengers just don't know? Like they never knew that he fought alongside them, for example?
no, I think, because at Aunt May's grave, Happy says that he knew Aunt May through Spider-Man. So
Hmm.
that must mean that they remember fighting with Spider-Man, and they remember like hanging out with Spider-Man, but they've just forgotten any time that he had the mask off.
That makes sense. That really does make it classic. Like no one knows his identity again, because that's a little bit
Hmm.
of a gripe I had with these films is that like everyone knows who he is, but in the comics, and certainly part of the reason why I love the animated series too is because he's very wary of who he gives his identity to, right? Like
Hmm.
I really appreciate that about Spider-Man. So I feel like this really perfectly recontextualizes everything. And with that, like I'm just ready to see Miles Morales. Like I do really enjoy the Peter Parker stuff, but I feel like I find Miles Morales probably a bit more appealing these days than Peter Parker. Maybe because that's a Peter Parker overkill that we've had in the last couple of decades. But I don't know. I think maybe the next film was the time to at least introduce him, kind of similar to how they've done in the video game, where they kind of have the two team up. I think that could work in a fourth film, and then in the fifth film, maybe have that be Tom Holland's final one, and have Miles Morales continue from there.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how this spell works because, you know, Doctor Strange says that, it really just brainwashes people, and that's why he's, able to do it because it's not reality altering.
Hmm.
But then if you were removing, everybody's knowledge that Peter, not just that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but just that Peter Parker exists, then how does Happy have any memories of May Parker? Like if, if it was Peter that introduced them, like does he just go in his mind like because Spider-Man didn't introduce him to Aunt May, like Peter Parker would have introduced him to Aunt May. So is it that any memory they had of Peter is like, in their minds now it's just he had the suit on, like or what? Like I'd really love some clarity on this
Yeah,
because
me as
when like
well.
Happy's at her grave and he says, "Yeah, I met her through Spider-Man." Like what does that
What
mean?
does that mean?
Because then because then if he was if he only has memories of Peter being Spider-Man, of like, every memory where he didn't have the mask on is removed, he would still, in those memories of Peter having the mask on, still remember him being like, "This is my Aunt May," and then he'd be like,
Right.
"Okay, so Spider-Man is is Aunt May's nephew." Because
Hmm.
if they're only removing who Peter Parker is, not who Spider-Man is, Spider-Man is also Aunt May's nephew as well as Peter Parker being Aunt May's nephew. So surely Happy still knows that Spider-Man is Aunt May's nephew.
Yeah, I think you've perfectly kind of
It's a bit
outlined
messy.
it. I think it's very easily fixed, though, if they want to redo it. It'd be a bit eye rolling, like you said, if they kind of go back on it, but nonetheless, I think they probably will. You mentioned there
Yeah,
about
was the like shithole apartment that he moves into, was it a replica of the Tobey Maguire one?
it
Because it
looked
looked a
remarkably
lot like
similar.
it.
It looked remarkably similar. Yeah, I'd be interested to see that.
I just wish that, whenever the guy had said, about
Mr.
the
Ditkovich.
rent at the end, yeah, if he had said, "Thanks, Mr. Ditkovich," or something, and they're just paying a bit of homage to
Yeah,
the Toby trilogy. Like I would
definitely.
have enjoyed that, but then I
100%,
don't
mate.
I don't think you can't recast Mr.
No, of
Ditkovich.
course you can't. Don't be so silly. No, it has to
And like,
be. Has to be him.
for the sake of the people listening, like I don't know how many people know this, but my favorite my one of my favorite behind the scenes things from any film is the fact that Mr. Ditkovich in the fourth film was the intention was to reveal that he was secretly Craven the Hunter in hiding, and that he was then going to be
I love
I
that.
don't know that he was going to be a villain used in the future, or whether that was just going to be like a throwaway joke, because Sam Raimi, I think, did do that a bit, where like he would sort of take the piss out of something that was quite important to fans in the comics, like
Stereo, they
where
kind of did it with that,
yeah,
right?
like something might be an offhanded joke, or like a joke character, or a serious character would be turned into a joke character or something like that. So I think if they had done Mr. Ditkovich as Craven the Hunter, I don't know that Spider-Man 5 would have been like Craven's Last Hunt, where like 60-something-year-old
Ditkovich.
Mr. Ditkovich, is wearing like his lion's pelt vest, and he's running about New York City. I don't know how well that would have played.
That would have been good though,
I mean,
right?
it would have been my favorite film of all time,
100%,
obviously.
100%, mate. Now you mentioned there, I think we've kind of covered our thoughts on the feature length of the film. We've covered the 2.5 hours. One thing I wanted to cover with you that you mentioned was the end credit scenes. Now they're quite unusual in the sense that one is a trailer and the other is kind of like a something that we thought was going to go somewhere in the film, but doesn't really go anywhere. Well, until obviously the little bit of the symbiote left behind. We'll start with the Venom one first, shall we? What was your thoughts on that? Because the last thing I want to see at the minute is like a symbiote Spider-Man, although I feel like that's where they're going, especially with like, the Tom Holland Peter Parker rage, where like Toby nearly dies. I think they really go into the anger there, and I feel like it makes sense with Venom. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but yeah, I desperately do not want to see a symbiote storyline. We're getting symbiote overload really because we've had two Venom films already. The third Venom film is going to be him fighting Toxin, so that's going to be him fighting another symbiote. So we're going to have three symbiote films already where the symbiote main character is fighting another symbiote villain. So I don't need to see the black suit storyline. I think that for all that Spider-Man 3 got wrong, mostly Venom, it got the Spider-Man and the black suit part right. I think where it's him. Well, obviously there's the emo dancing
I agree.
sequence that
Apart
I
from that
wasn't born
stuff,
a
yeah.
fan of. They show Peter Parker gets the black suit. He becomes aggressive. He ruins his personal relationships, and then they have the iconic clock tower scene where he or the church bell scene where he
Mhm.
rips off the symbiote, and then that's passed on to Eddie Brock. I don't know how you do any of this already with Eddie Brock already introduced, and us already having seen all the iconic parts of the symbiote storyline in Spider-Man 3. I don't know how you execute a film well without rehashing or retconning, because it's either you bring in a new Eddie Brock for the MCU universe, which would be like, why bother when we already have Venom and nobody even really likes that much anyway. I don't think I th-
I feel like they
don't
were
bother.
potentially.
Like
I feel
just
like they
make
were.
just make a comedy film with Flash Thompson and it's Agent Venom, like Deadpool style Agent Venom with Tony Revolori. I would appreciate that.
I feel like they're potentially. Referencing. They poke fun at the Harry Osborn stuff and how like Peter's best friend tried to kill him, and I'm not sure if they try to do that with Ned Leeds in this film because famously he's the Hobgoblin, isn't he? So I think
Hmm.
Jacob Batalon as a villain would be quite unusual. Like that would be quite bizarre, but I wouldn't put it past them to maybe do the symbiote story with him or something instead, or with another character. I'm not too sure, but yeah, I feel like they are going to try and do that because why bring over Venom in the first place? Like that's clearly a well marketed thing that they're going to try and do. Like like they're going to do a symbiote storyline. I feel so that's all but guaranteed. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't have much more to say on the Venom stuff. If you have anything to say on that.
Well, just something that we had talked about in the car, that I noticed already, and that you mentioned as well when we spoke about it, that they make a point of saying the reason that the Spider-Man and the villains are there are because the universe is pulling in people
Yes.
from other universes who know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. So why is Eddie Brock there? And like, why has he spent like an entire day or 2 days, in this new universe? Sorry. Yes. Sorry. I'm back in a sec.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if it's pulled all of these people in from the universes who know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, what's Venom doing there?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I think then we could maybe explain it by saying that Venom's got some kind of connection to Spider-Man somehow, through the symbiote. I'm not too sure. Um, I thought it was maybe going to be through Tobey Maguire Spider-Man or something, and that's how he's there. But no, they don't really explain that at all.
I
I'd be
mean, I
intrigued to
suppose
see.
if the universe has like the power to time displace, they could say it was their destiny to fight in the future. So he is eventually going to know who Peter Parker is. So it brought a past version of Eddie, because they talk about time being, for each timeline it's like a closed loop, like it's like all the time in one universe is planned out, and if anything goes differently, it creates another universe. So I suppose everybody kind of has their fate laid out in front of them, because of how time works in the MCU. So I suppose Eddie Brock, could just be destined to meet him in the future, and that's why he was able to be pulled into this universe. If we want to be generous about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're spot on now. That wraps up the review. It's me again from the future, or the past, or the present, technically, because you're watching this at the minute. We're going to do a separate breakdown again after this. So the end credit scenes is like a little bit of a video. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you'll know what those are. We'll not post that until a few days, just to give people time to see the movie. And of course, stay tuned later on in the channel to see a review of West Side Story. Callum and I had a great experience with IMAX there our first time. We'll talk to you all about that. We had a really cool gala event. That was awesome. And yeah, we're going to be doing Ruse for Hawkeye as well. A really big episode this week. And Matrix 4. So plenty of content coming on the channel. Hope you guys enjoy.